I want to thank Representative Alirio Uribe and the coalition of trade union, academic, labor, and human rights organizations sponsoring this important national forum and public hearing for inviting me to speak today. I regret that I cannot be with you in person, but the United States Congress is in session this week and debating the bill that authorizes defense spending, and so I cannot be absent from that important debate. I also want to send a very special greeting to your next witness, the new Minister of Labor, Clara Lopez. Here in the United States Congress, and especially the Congressional Monitoring Group on Labor Rights in Colombia, there is a high level of expectations and willingness to work with Minister Lopez. We want to make sure that the promises of the U.S.-Colombia Labor Action Plan and the many laws and decrees issued by the Colombian Labor Ministry translate into genuine changes for the better on the ground. We want to make sure there is real change in the working conditions of all Colombian workers. All workers and unions must be able to exercise their basic labor rights and human rights without fear of violence, the loss of their jobs, or death threats against them and their families. So let me say to the Minister, please know that you have my support and the support of many of my colleagues in the United States House of Representatives and the United States Senate as you take up your new position and pursue the guarantee of these rights. Today's public hearing and two-day national forum explore a critical topic on the role of labor in building peace in Colombia. For over 16 years, I've had the privilege to travel throughout your country and meet with many Colombians at the local, regional, and national level in both rural and urban settings. I've met with the wealthy and the poor, elected officials, members of the military, workers and trade unionists, businessmen and religious leaders, academics and NGOs, victims and land rights advocates. I've also met with the families of the kidnapped and the disappeared, Afro-Colombians and indigenous peoples, young people whose neighborhoods are controlled by gangs, representatives of international organizations, the internally displaced, and refugees forced to flee their homes because of the violence. I am so humbled and grateful that they have shared their stories, concerns, hopes, and dreams with me. Over and over, I have heard Colombians express their longing for peace, an end to the violence, and the right to a life and work with basic dignity and respect. And I've often thought to myself, isn't this what all of us, every human being wants? Don't we all want a life where we take joy in bringing a newborn child into the world? Don't we all want a world where we can raise our children and grandchildren safely and with hope in their futures? I've met with hundreds of Colombian workers over the years. I've sat down with campesino farmers trying to make a living without resorting to illegal crops and who have been caught in the crossfire between the military, the guerrillas, and the paramilitaries. I've met with sugarcane workers who work in the fields and processing plants. I've sat down with port workers, oil workers, and those who labor on palm oil plantations. I've met with public sector workers, healthcare workers, and domestic workers. All of them face a level of threats and violence in their daily lives that is unimaginable. I've witnessed their fear and desperation, their defiance and courage. And both individually and collectively, I have heard honest, reasonable ideas and recommendations about how to make their workplace and lives better and more productive. If given a chance, Colombians already know how to make things better, more fair and equitable. They just need their leaders to listen to them and to help. We are all here today because Colombia is at a historic moment. After more than a half-century of violence and conflict that has scarred nearly every family in Colombia, ending the conflict is no longer an unattainable dream, but an imminent reality. But implementing and achieving peace, long-lasting, sustainable peace, is more difficult than negotiating a peace accord, which has been hard enough. Colombians face not just the mechanics of carrying out a complex agreement, but the inequities and violence that have fueled economic, political, and social injustice for generations. This requires all Colombians and all of Colombia's friends to imagine a new Colombia, one committed to bettering the lives of all the people, especially those who have been most vulnerable to violence. We must challenge those dynamics and relationships that impede such improvements. Peace in Colombia requires the right of all Colombians to work with dignity, to receive a fair and decent wage for a fair and decent day's work. Colombians must know that if they, in their role as workers, want to organize a union and negotiate directly with their employer about improving conditions in the workplace and wages, that they will not be met with violence and death. Too often, workers' demands in the workplace have been met with violence, threats, and murders. These means have not been exercised just by combatant forces. They are also used by entrenched interests more invested in preserving privileges than in reaching fair agreements with those who work in factories, in the fields, or in any number of public and private enterprises. Violence is used against all kinds of men and women in all kinds of workplaces. It is the labor of these workers that helps to strengthen every household, every business and farm, every community, city and town, and every department in the entire country. And for the life of me, I have never understood why we hold these workers' dignity and lives so cheap when the fortunes of the nation rely on their labor. So for Colombia to prepare for peace and eventually carry it out, there must be recognition of the need for dignity and respect for its current workforce in all sectors of the economy. There must also be a guarantee of basic labor rights and human rights of every Colombian worker. Soon, thousands of FARC fighters, men and women, will demobilize, and the same might be true for some part of the Colombian Armed Forces. These men and women will need education and training and to be integrated into the workforce. They will need to earn a decent wage at a decent job where their rights will be guaranteed. If not, the potential of their returning to combat or joining a criminal network is extremely high. This is hardly a revelation on my part. I've been reading in your press for years about the challenges of reintegration, including the need for former combatants to have dignified work. Collaboration between government, the private sector, unions, and labor rights experts like the National Labor School, the ILO, and Solidarity Center, among others, is essential to success. I have never found Colombia lacking in ideas, creativity, expertise, or the human capital to bring about great advances or change. What is often missing are the political will and sustained engagement to make sure it happens. Colombia is not unique in this, but Colombia is the place where at this moment in time in history, a peace accord needs to be implemented. Colombia needs a peace accord that will raise the standard of living and respect for basic human rights for all Colombians. The peace accord must help to reintegrate into the workforce these thousands of adults whose resumes describe lives spent in combat and warfare. And the peace accord will likely take place during some tough economic times. Colombia's current labor force, its unions and labor advocates need to be included in and prepared for carrying out essential roles in the reintegration mandated by the peace accords. And to do so, they must know that their own rights and dignity are ensured, that their own livelihoods are secure, and that employers and local and federal governments are genuine partners in carrying out this historic task. From what I've witnessed on the ground in Colombia's many workplaces, from rural, agricultural, to ports, from oil fields to factories, this is not going to be easy. Colombia's workers are among the most abused, the most violated in terms of rights and dignity in the entire world. If Colombia hopes to successfully integrate former combatants, it must, as a nation and a people, in government institutions and in the private and public sectors, recognize the rights and dignity of labor, the rights and dignity of its workers, and the rights and dignity of the union movement. Anyone declaring otherwise is a saboteur of peace. It's easy for me to say these things. I'm far away, and I live in a country where I don't worry about violence or threats because of my views, let alone how to wrestle with ending over 60 years of conflict and helping former adversaries and victims reconcile, live with one another as neighbors, and coexist in the workplace together. But labor, the work each of us does to earn a decent living for ourselves and our families, is at the heart of having a dignified life. And there is no peace without dignity, respect, and basic human rights. The role of labor, of workers and trade unionists, in building peace in Colombia is at the very heart of how Colombians, all Colombians, will build the peace and create lives, families, and communities that thrive together. To those in government and in power, let me just say this. Dealing with issues of labor rights and standing firm against impunity can be inconvenient, it can be uncomfortable, and it can be very difficult. Solving problems is always easier said than done. But if you don't get this right, then Colombia's future will not be bright. Getting this right will create more opportunities for everyone and encourage more investment in Colombia. Getting this right, dealing with these issues, is the smart thing to do. So please know that you are not alone in facing these challenges. You have support and resources from friends outside of Colombia. We want you to succeed in defining what needs to be done, how to do it across economic and social divides, and in achieving work with dignity, life with dignity, and peace with dignity. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for inviting me to share my thoughts. I send my best wishes for this exploration of the critical role of labor in building peace in Colombia. I wish you all the best, and thank you very much.